Daniel, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Perfect. I would like to invite everybody back to Pride in the Living Room Jewmos edition. So, a quick reminder on Pride in the Living Room. It was founded by Israeli LGBT organization Agudah in memory of the 2009 Tel Aviv Gay Center shooting and the Pride Parade stabbing in 2015. And the Agudah founded this project to offer a voice and a stage to LGBT Jews from around the world to share their stories, to encourage empathy and community, and really to bring people together. So I've been inspired to take this initiative back home, and this has brought me to welcoming Daniel to the stage to share his perspective. Daniel, over to you.
Okay. How, talk me through it. How would you like to, what kind of questions do you want to know?
Well, let's start at the beginning. So, talk to me about what Judaism was like growing up.
Okay. So Jared and I actually both come from Perth. We both grew up in Perth. I was a few years older. And I attended Carmel primary high school all the way through. And so my kind of formative Jewish education was very much through Carmel. I was never a particularly youth movement-y kid, nor a particularly religious person. Our family was very traditional. Carmel was very, very much that, very like you could choose your own adventure. It was very traditional and kind of inclusive of all different strokes, I guess. So that was my kind of formative Jewish experience. I was part of one of the 5 synagogues in Perth, and very much grew up and had my bar mitzvah there. I got involved. I got more and more involved in Judaism after high school. I think, having been more musically focused in school, and then kind of becoming more interested in Judaism afterwards. After I went on a B'nai Akiva Shnat program, not because of the religious aspect, more because of the program itself. Like, I just thought it was a really good Israel program, and I'd done Hebrew all the way through to year 12, and so I wanted to put that to use somehow. So I went to Israel and had a phenomenal year there, and then came back and sort of slowly but surely started to get more and more involved in B'nai Akiva from a leadership perspective, and that sort of drew me more and more into religious Judaism and kind of the I don't know, that like a little bit more that Judaism had to offer that I hadn't experienced as a younger person. How much I enjoyed keeping Shabbat and starting to keep kosher and like those kind of things as I got more and more involved. Yeah, that sort of took me through into my mid-20s-ish, I guess.
What you say is really relevant to me because I have a fond memory of you being my B'nai Madrich at some point.
I think when you were in year 9 with a bunch of
Probably,
rowdy
yeah.
boys.
I have very fond memories of B'nai. So I wanted to ask you, so we've spoken about some of the Jewish side. Can you talk us through how your LGBT identity, how you discovered it, how that carried with you concurrently?
Certainly. I was never someone who knew from age 6 that they were different. Like, that wasn't my kind of narrative, I guess. I had always, like, to a large degree, kind of thought that I was interested in girls, and that was sort of my story most of the way through school. And I think it was probably more of a like blinkered, there wasn't any other visual, there was nothing else kind of suggested as another option, and so I never really kind of gave it a huge amount of thought. Not that I was like running around dating a stack of girls either. And probably in my like late teens and early 20s, I started to kind of I don't know, something started to like percolate, I guess, although it was certainly never anything that I really understood or unpacked a lot. And it was very easy to just like put it in a box, put the box on a shelf, leave the box on the shelf and not like deal with that at all. And particularly, I think in the religious community where it's such a like powerfully heteronormative kind of, you go on Schnutt, you come back, you find your girlfriend, you get married, you start having kids, like that narrative is so strong. I just didn't really like investigate much further than that until kind of later in the game, in my kind of like maybe 25-ish, I had been dating a girl and then I broke up with her and I realized kind of subsequent to that like actually, no, can't do this. This is like not something, either anytime I ever date a girl, either I'll end up breaking up with her after a few weeks or a few months or a few years or 30 years. And like, regardless, that would not be a great state of affairs. And then I sort of slowly, again, like kind of sat with that for a few months, reached out to a friend of a friend in Israel and kind of came out to them for the first time, which was pretty monumental, more for their advice, having been someone who was in there. I think for me, one of the real difficulties was going to be navigating the religious community and the queer, like that queer factor. Like I had always known that my family were going to be amazing. My parents had made it very clear that they would be like, there was never any doubt that I would be fine from an immediate family perspective, but I was more nervous about my community and how that would look, and how this guy who was so involved in his shul and B'nai Kiva and whatever, how that would play out. And I was, I think, extremely lucky. Eventually, over a couple of months, I kind of workshopped that in my mind and with a couple of other people. And when I came home from a holiday over the summer, I came out to my family, and within a week had kind of come out to everyone, including my rabbi and very close family friend who I was probably the most nervous about talking to. And then I think, how much further do you want me to
go? If you have more, then I'm enjoying listening to you speak.
I was incredibly lucky. I think my family were amazing and supportive. My friends were amazing and supportive. And the thing that had made me the most nervous, which was my rabbi and his family and our broader community, they were unbelievably accepting and wonderful. Like, I came out to him and his wife on Wednesday night, and he sort of said to me, like, I don't care, it's like you're telling me left-handed, it doesn't change anything, and I expect to see you in shul on Friday night. And by the time that I had kind of, by Shabbat of that week, I had spoken to every person in the shul who I cared about, and they had all unanimously given me such a wonderful response that I was amazingly comfortable to walk into shul on Shabbat night and just feel like very light. And it was a really amazing feeling. And I'm aware that I'm incredibly lucky to have had, although it was a little bit later than some, to have had a very atraumatic, easy, short coming out process that was almost unanimously positively received. So for that, I'm incredibly grateful. I think from there, and that was probably 4, coming on 5 years ago now, I think the interesting thing, so coming out is the first part of that journey, but I think as someone who's strongly kind of passionate about Judaism and involved in the Jewish community, the tricky part then is navigating your own path within that sort of seemingly non-marryable dichotomy of, for myself, like religious Judaism, or at least more observant Judaism, and a queer community who are so not that in many ways. And I think the past 4 or 5 years for me has been a really rich and interesting process of navigating and juggling, how do I maintain both of those, and which comes to the fore. And I don't think you ever have a real, you build your own blend, I guess, is what I would kind of say, coming through that experience. Like, it was highlighted to me on Yom Kippur a couple of years ago, where I went I went to the kind of very sort of right-wingy Mizrahi shul for Friday, for Kol Nidre, and then for Yom Kippur service went to an extremely humanist and more inclusive service during the day. And I came away, although neither of them gave me what I wanted in and of themselves alone, it was the experience of both of them. And when you kind of put them all together, the whole Yom Kippur experience in that sense was really exactly what I wanted, like a real blend. And I think that's been a really interesting journey. And each kind of, it changes from day to day and week to week and month to month. You sort of, your queer versus Jewish identities sometimes feel unmarriable and sometimes feel perfectly balanced, and sometimes one is kind of more at the fore than the other, but it's the kind of continuing desire to make that work that is what kind of pushes forward, I think.
It's really interesting you talking about building your own blend and how you may go to a Mizrahi shul, you know, during the night, and then a more progressive humanistic shul during the day. I have to tell you, I've recently I've gone through my own journey, and I've recently been able to do a similar thing. So I may go to, yeah, I try to explore different types of Judaism, and maybe each place doesn't give me 100% of what I'm looking for, but you're right. Together, collectively, those experiences give me at least some you know, whole experience. So I really relate to that. I wanted to, can you hear beeping in the background? Okay, good. I think they're doing some renovations. So I wanted to ask you, you said that the coming out process, would you call yourself gay, or you don't use that label? Gay?
Sure.
So you've come out as gay within the Jewish community, and that was a relatively easy process, as you've said. Have you come out as Jewish in the gay spaces that you inhabit?
Very much. I have always been, I mean, like walking around with a kippah makes you visibly Jewish. I think it's a no-brainer. You don't really have a choice. And I think I have, it's not a unique experience, but I've had the experience of being a doctor. You spend your, I've had an incredibly supportive and interested circle of friends and colleagues who are very kind of culturally aware and sensitive throughout my medical training and onwards. And so I'm very used to being like the Jewish guy who like they're all friends with. And though at times it kind of feels a little bit tokenistic in some ways, for the vast majority of time, it's a really rewarding experience being able to be that, like, oh, they've never met a Jewish guy before, but like, I know Dan, he's great. Like, he's taught me all these weird and wonderful things about Shabbat and eating challah, which is delicious, and like whatever. But, and so that experience for me of being like the Jewish guy in a circle is not new. And I think I have just continued to take that, like coming out and moving into the gay space. I think I have just continued that same lived experience that I've had previously in the medical world. I think the difference, though, that is very palpable is that a lot of queer people have had negative religious experiences. And so that sometimes can be quite triggering for them. And I found that really interesting. To be a religious person and a visibly religious person in a gay space is a really interesting experience, I think. So for the only time that I've actually ever faced any kind of, I wouldn't call it anti-Jewish sentiment. Certainly it wasn't deliberately anti-Semitic, but I was at a club in Melbourne and I, for the most part, don't shy away of wearing kippah when I go out. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But this particular time I was. And I was approached by a guy who kind of came up to me and like very intensely was like, hey man, like that's got no place here. Like you shouldn't be wearing that here. And that was the only time in my whole life in any space that I've faced any kind of like anti-Jewish sentiment. And I think it was really interesting. I came away, like I didn't feel anything like, I felt no affront myself. I didn't feel particularly personally offended or anything. I just was so sad that that has been the experience of so many gay people, that they feel so triggered and confronted by any visible kind of like obvious sign of religion, that it could be so triggering for them. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, I've definitely come out as Jewish in a gay space many times, constantly, always, I would say. But the long answer is that you're othered in a different way in some ways in the queer community for being religious. And I've spoken to friends of mine who I've met a lovely guy who's a religious Christian, and he and I had a really interesting conversation about how much, and we had a huge amount in common, in that we felt at times quite othered within the gay community for being observantly religious of whatever background. And I'm sure the same would extend across all religions. And it's an interesting and tragic kind of marker within the gay community, I think, that there's so much trauma associated with religion for many gay people, that seeing it in their, what they consider their safe space, is really problematic for them. And something that I'm very kind of aware of and try to be sensitive to.
You spoke about being in the club, wearing your kippah, and being and having a conversation with someone who made a comment about kippahs not being welcome in that space. I wanted to ask you, I'm sure that you've encountered throughout your journey people who maybe have different views to you, maybe people who come from a different life experience than you, and they may have questions about your Jewish and or your gay identity. So my question is, if you do have experiences where you are confronted by those people, how do you react, and what gives you strength in those moments?
I think it's partly about like having some self-confidence and like knowing that you as a person have value and worth, and your experience and your background is in some ways unique, and you'll come at things with a certain set of opinions and values, and that's okay. But also, to me, it's really about like understanding where they are coming from. Like, more often than not, they are coming from a place of like trauma, intense, like really difficult background. And I'm very aware that more like people talk a lot about kind of white privilege. I feel like I have like easy life privilege, in that I had an amazing and supportive and emotionally intelligent family, and phenomenally easy coming out experience, and the ability to just continue being myself with no one really ever telling me, well, you shouldn't, or you can't, or that's weird, or whatever. Like I think that I'm very aware that is that ease is not universal at all. And so I think when you encounter people like that, it's more about understanding what their own story and their trauma and their background, and like why they're coming at you with such intensity, and helping them to kind of like workshop that a bit. I mean, like obviously if someone's like abusing you, then you don't cop that. But if it's triggering distress in that person, understanding why, and being that, like I've spent all of my life since high school pretty much being that Jewish, like being that nice Jewish guy that I know who, whatever. Like, I think that role in the broader world is a really important one. And so that's the same here, like with someone who you're discussing who has come at you with a kind of intense vibe. You need to become that person for them. Like, they have had a triggering experience with some like horrible religious or like religious figure or whatever it is. And you need to be that like guy who is, okay, well, I actually met a religious dude the other night, and like I thought he was a weirdo to start with, but in the end, he turned out to be like pretty normal and really nice, and like we had a good chat. Like that kind of soft advocacy is really important, I think. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
I think it does, and it's actually it's really interesting for me to hear that, to hear the way that you describe that. And there are many people who are watching this, who will watch this, who will identify with what you're saying. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think there's a role for both. Like it's you can't cop actual abuse at the end of the day, and like that needs escalating if it is really problematic. But understanding where the other person is coming from and trying to just soften all of that for them and to kind of work through it with them is really important, if you can, and you have the time or the patience or the inclination. I don't know. Like sometimes equally, like I can't be bothered. Like I'm just out with my friends having a good night and someone wants to make comments and I just actually want to have a drink and a dance and like not be that guy all the time. And that's hard. Like that's its own kind of juggling when you want to be that guy and when you just want to like be out with your friends and like not be any different to anyone else. That is a whole other like conversation, I think.
I know that for myself, even though I don't consider myself an activist or in any way, I do think that in some ways being out as a Jew in gay spaces and out as a gay man in Jewish spaces, I am by definition making some kind of political statement. When you do wear a
100%.
kippah in gay spaces, do you feel that?
Yeah, I do. I didn't at the beginning. I think I was very proud earlier on, and now I like it's a decision, I would say. I think having had more experience and having met more people who struggle with it, I think like every time I go out in a gay space with a kippah, it's certainly, I don't know, it's good, it's important, and I like am proud of it, but equally sometimes it, like I was saying, it's sort of, it's heavy a bit. That's not easy. And also, to be honest, like in Australia, like I don't know, are there any other people who go out to a gay club on a regular basis with a kippah on their head? Like, I don't think so. Certainly none in Perth. None that I know in Melbourne. Maybe in Sydney, a couple. Like, sometimes it's exhausting to just be like the only gay in the Australian village who's wearing puftuf. I imagine that's very different in Israel or in America where there's so many more people, but certainly sometimes it's tiring here. But by the same token, then you have really rewarding experiences that are only brought about by the fact that you're out wearing kippah. So it like ebbs and flows. Sounds really negative. Sorry.
No, I think I'm sure there are many people out there in the world who would love to wear their kippah to shul. Sorry, not to shul, to a gay club. They do wear them to a shul. But they may feel that they have challenge in those spaces. So I think that hearing your story would mean a lot to them. I wanted to ask, so you spoke about the heteronormativity of the Jewish community that you grew up in at Carmel. I would know because I was there as well. So as you are, or as you merge the two worlds together, how have you applied dating and marriage and kids and looking toward the future to your life as a gay man?
Are there two questions? I'm going to split those a little bit, if that's okay. I think firstly, like I would say the heteronormativity didn't come so much from Carmel as much as it did from B'nai and religious Judaism also, I think. Carmel then, which is now a while ago, was no different to any other school in that sense. I think most schools in the 90s and early 2000s were very heteronormative, and that's not unique to a Jewish school. And I'm proud to say that Carmel is now much less so, and very visibly kind of supportive and allied. And I think that's just a general culture shift over, like a societal shift over time, more so than anything Jewish related. I think the heteronormativity came more from the kind of religious Jewish B'nai Akiva, like shul-based world, where very much is kind of that stereotypical conveyor belt of shnat, home, 3 years of leading, find a wife, get married, have a kid within a year. That kind of conveyor belt was very much in existence. And again, I think now that is shifting. There's more. There's certainly the societal shift brings about a shift in the attitude within the Jewish organizations, which is really nice. For me personally, it's a good question in terms of my own like future life, marriage, Jewish dating, etc. I think I am like, my Judaism has always been for me. I think as a growing up and in my first few years in B'nai Akiva, I was very much like part of that conveyor belt thinking. But as soon as I came out, all of a sudden it felt like the roadmap was gone, like that real roadmap of what you are expected to do and how you're expected to do it and what time frame had kind of disappeared from under my feet. And I felt like quite confused as to what to do. And for a while, I still had that real intense hang up of like, you can't date non-Jewish boys, you like have to only see Jewish people, and like, no. And it was really my med friends, and particularly like I have a very close group of gay med boys who kind of brought me out of that bubble a little bit more. And I think like the past 10 years has been very much for me, like my Judaism is for me. I will do it in my way, for me, on my terms, in my time. And I will bring to a future family that part of Judaism that I want to. I think that I had a conversation as we talk about kind of pivotal turning points in your queer Jewish journey. And one of them was certainly when my 85-year-old, very traditional grandma in Perth called me when I was in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and kind of got straight to the point and said, like, you should know that, like, I don't expect you to still marry a Jewish boy, right? Like, you can date other people, you know. I was like, oh, good. That's like interesting of you to say. And she was like, well, I don't know, like the numbers are tiny. You like need to be happy. You should just like find someone that gives you joy. And if they're Jewish, then that's fantastic. And they have that shared culture and history. But if they're not, then that's also fine. Like, you're strong enough in your own Judaism to kind of bring that to the table. And I think that has kind of stuck with me. I haven't had like particularly long-term partners to kind of try that out with anyway, but like I certainly feel confident enough that I would be able to bring the Judaism that I would want to a partnership and to a family down the line. In my head, my kids will. In my head, my kids are still going to go to Carmel, but like I think it's just because I really love Carmel a lot. Like, I also can't see myself living in Perth, yet my kids in my future family are attending Carmel school, and I know. It's probably some workshopping that needs doing there.
I always like to say, you know, find a boy you like, get to know them on the first day, build a deeper connection on the second day, and then on the third day, bring out the pair of scissors and say, surprise.
Intense.
Are you back?
Would you get a fourth date is the real question.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, sure. I think it's different in that, like, it's so obvious when you meet me that Judaism is a big deal. So, and like, it's obvious on all of my dating profiles, and like it's one of those self-selecting things. Like, the people that will swipe whatever direction or say hi or whatever, or maintain a conversation, are clearly people that are like, oh, okay, this dude's pretty Jewish, and that's okay. So
Yeah.
it's one of those sort of self-selecting joys.
It is. I tend to have Jewish elements in my dating profiles as well, and I think it is useful in the sense of filtering out false positives to begin with, so you don't have those conversations down the track. Um, do you think that have you experienced people fetishizing your religion or your culture from a dating perspective?
That's a really interesting question. The short answer is no, but yeah, it's a really interesting question. It happens. There was a guy at work that I was chatting to who was like, got very intensely excited about the fact that I was Jewish, and like in a quite fetishized way. And I was like, it never dawned on me that would occur. I was like, oh, like bald Jewish looking nosy, like not like, come on, like this really, like what's to fetishize? And it was the first time I was like, oh man, people can be really weird. Like, some people just really like certain things, and like, power to them. I don't know. The short answer is it's not something that I've experienced a lot of, but it definitely is out there. I think it's probably more problematic in other, it's something that's more problematic for other minority groups than us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I don't want to like poach that problem as a uniquely Jewish experience when it's not really.
I have noticed that I've started my coming out journey in Judaism from maybe my early teens, but my coming out journey within the gay community only really started a year ago. I only became outwardly Jewish in gay spaces quite recently. And yeah, I'm not sure if I'd call it fetishizing, but you mentioned before about this shared trauma that a lot of gay or LGBTIQ plus people experience. And a lot of people have been burnt by a religion in the past. And maybe they've been rejected by their families and by all the support networks who used to give them comfort now
100%.
provide the opposite for them. And maybe it's not fetishizing, maybe it's just seeing someone who is able to hold on to every piece of themselves, who hasn't had to make those sacrifices, and that might be something appealing. That's something I've thought about.
Yeah. I think the community aspect is a really important one as well. Like, Jews do community really, really well. And I think that like that ethnic-y lifestyle of like the shared food and the culture and the family gather, like the extended family gatherings and the festivals, and like it's a real I think it's like the community aspect of the culture of Judaism is very attractive to many people, I think, and that could be something that people fixate on or find really attractive, which is understandable. And again, that's not unique to the gay community either. There are plenty of like non-Jewish straight people who find the Jewish community very attractive.
I have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah. So first I wanted to ask, so you grew up in Perth and now you live in Melbourne. So you've experienced the Jewish and the gay communities in both of those cities. What would you say is something that the Australian Jewish and the Australian gay community could do better to reach out to each other?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of work, I think there could be more work done in schools, is what I would say. I think when you think about where the trauma sits for the queer community, it's largely in those formative years. I mean, not exclusively, but it is largely in those formative school years and like horrendous schoolyard experiences and systematized homophobia in schools. And I think though that is definitely changing and much for the better than it was, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of increasing visibility within schools and just normalizing that kind of like make sure that they're queer texts that you're studying in English Lit. Make sure that you like have visibly queer youth leaders coming into the school when there's a range of different youth groups coming in. And just making like clear, safe spaces for queer and questioning children and high schoolers. And I think, and like I said, I think that is happening, but there's probably more that could be done. Jewish, I guess that's from a sort of Jewish perspective. I'm a big fan of soft advocacy. I think like the like being there and openly both is really important. So being at shul, and that's part of the reason that I haven't explored a huge number of other shuls and whatever during my time in Melbourne, is because part of me thinks like, actually, although I don't get everything I want from whatever kind of more religious shul it is that I'm attending, I think it's really important that a visibly gay guy is going to their minyan, and like everybody knows that that guy is out, and proudly so, and he's, and like friendships I think are really important as well, and support amongst like social supports that are visible to others I think is really important. So like going into the shul and not standing in the corner like quietly by yourself and then leaving and being like, oh, that like weird guy in the corner who comes and goes and I think he's gay but no one said anything. But no, like being this like very friendly kind of like goes in, hugs everyone, like shakes hands with a stack of people, like knows the rabbi, goes to different people for Shabbos lunch. Like I think that like entrenchment within the community just normalizes it more, and particularly for younger people, seeing it makes it more okay. Like that was something I was struck by when I first came out. In the first few days after I came out publicly in Perth, one of the parents of the shul that I was at called me up and said, like, you've got no idea what you've done, not just for you, but for high schoolers and 20-year-olds who are coming to our shul who feel like they don't have a place because they are questioning. And I'd seen a lot of people come out and disappear. But for me, I think it's really important to come out and stay, because that visibility is what will like make it easier for people who are younger than you. Again, I've managed to really meander off your question, I feel.
No, not at all. You went into a lot of detail, which is, you know, and not just detail, but actionable
over the top
steps that,
yeah. I think being visibly there is important. And so that's not necessarily a community group role. Although obviously like all of the, like when you see a variety of queer Jewish groups marching at Pride, like that's amazing. Like that kind of thing is fantastic and visible and really important and makes a statement. But for me, in an ethnic community, often it's not as much about a big statement as much as it is about slow and very visible, palpable presence within community organizations, but being visibly out in both Jewish and queer sense. And that takes time. And people who are brave enough to be both of those things visibly. I think empowering people to do that is important.
Do you have, so you mentioned that there are many Jews who are queer who end up leaving the community, and that it's a rarer choice for someone to choose to stay. So within those queer spaces where there are people who there's still a piece of them who love Judaism and want to hold on to Judaism because it gave them so much love and life as a kid. Do you have any thoughts about what the queer communities could do more of to reach out to those cultures and those religions?
I don't know if I would, I think I would flip it. I don't necessarily think that it's as much about the queer community as a whole reaching out to those groups, because the queer community as a whole is something that you come to, not that like goes backwards. It's a group that you kind of come from your lived experience to my like thinking. And so I think it's actually the job of you, the Jewish queer person, to show that aspect of your culture and your rich background to your queer friends. I think and that's something that I do all the time. Like when I host Shabbat dinners, which is regularly, I'm often the only Jewish person at the table. Like I'll have 10 of my gay medical friends around, or other, and be giving them challah for the first time and showing them kiddush and lighting candles and what a Friday night dinner looks like, and having seder and bringing my friends to that. And I think showing your rich culture, and that again is something that I've been doing since long before I came out. That's something that I've always loved doing, is showing the beautiful side of our history and culture to other people. And I think that just that requires a bit of, I don't know, maybe it's very what's the word? Not in extroverted. Maybe that's a particularly look at me, here I am, look at all of this kind of attitude. But I don't, it's not in a personal sense, it's in a cultural sense. Why should I give up all of this cool stuff? I'm not going to give it up. I'm just going to bring you with me. When I went to Sydney for Mardi Gras last year with a bunch of friends from Perth, I insisted that on Friday night we were going to stay in a place that had a kitchen that I could cook a whole dinner for and have 10 of my mates around who were all in Sydney. And instead, on Thursday night we went out, on Saturday night we went out, on Sunday night we went out, but on Friday night, I insisted that we weren't going out and we were staying and having Shabbat dinner. We made challah and made food, and we had a really Hamish, very cozy, more PG rated night instead of the rest of Mardi Gras. But I think showing that and being proud of that part of your culture and bringing people to it is what I have always been a big advocate of. I think that's the way that you kind of evolve.
That's a really beautiful answer. Thank you for sharing. I have one final question for you, Daniel. I'd like to take us all the way back to something you said close to the beginning, where you mentioned that your very first experience talking about your gayness to anyone was to a friend in Israel. And I just wanted to ask, all these years later, looking back, what does that moment mean to you? And have you had a chance to share with that person the impact?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm smiling because it gives me great joy. So this was a person who I didn't know very well at all. It wasn't a friend of mine. It was a friend of a friend who I'd met once when I was in Israel, and who we'd Facebook friended each other, and I'd seen him over the years. He was already out, so he was very out, and I'd seen him over the years hook up with this guy, and they stayed together for a while, and then they went and got married in Denmark, and then they surrogated twins, and I just kind of watched his journey, and I knew that he was from a really similar he was from a B'nai Akiva background in South Africa, and he was a similarly we just had a similar vibe. And I was okay, this guy will get it. This guy gets the community background that I'm nervous about coming out to, and he's been successfully out. Look, he's got a boyfriend, they're married, he's done it right. And reaching out to him, pressing send on the message to him, where I was and funnily enough, I like read it a couple of weeks ago for some reason. I can't remember why. And like this essay of a message that I had crafted and spent hours and hours and hours like writing and rewriting, and like was so nervous about sending, because I knew that as soon as I pressed send, that was the beginning of the end. Like I just knew, like if I was going to come out to him, I was going to eventually come out to everyone, and I did so within a couple of months. But he was amazingly supportive and was just like, you've done the hard work, which is like being honest with yourself and coming out to another human being, and that's the hardest thing ever. And it was just like, right, now you need to go and like kiss some boys and like actually date. That was also good advice. But like looking back on that, I think I've messaged, although we're not like, again, we're not close friends, we've never lived in the same place either, but we've been in touch a few times since, and he knows how what a powerful experience that was for me. And I would love the opportunity, and have done for some, but would love the opportunity to be that kind of person for anybody that like feels that way inclined. So if you do feel that way and you need someone who you don't really know very well, you're very welcome to hit me up. But yeah, no, a very powerful and positive and landmark point in my life for sure. Nice to think about.
Thank
and
you
again,
so
I
much.
was lucky that my first ever experience coming out to someone was met with such positivity and support. Like, and I know very well that that's not the case for many people, but luckily I had a fantastic experience.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for
Pleasure.
spending this time with us at Pride in the Living Room. It's my absolute pleasure to hear you speak, to hear your words of wisdom.
Very sweet.
And I'm very happy that your journey has been a pretty smooth ride. And, you know, do you have any final passing words?
I think most of it's been said. Thanks for your time. It was nice chatting.
My pleasure. Here's to sharing our stories today and many
Indeed.
more times in the future. Thank you.
Indeed. See you later.